The sound of screeching tires and shattering fiberglass echoed through the night as Karen's SUV plowed straight through Detective Sarah Chen's backyard jacuzzi. Water exploded everywhere, steam rising like smoke from a crime scene. But when Karen stepped out, smugly declaring she was teaching the little Asian girl a lesson, she had no idea she'd just destroyed the property of someone who carried a badge, and the authority to make her regret every racist word that had ever left her mouth. Detective Sarah Chen had been looking forward to this evening for weeks. After pulling double shifts on the Morrison murder case, she'd finally cracked it, putting away a serial killer who'd terrorized the city for months. The hot jacuzzi water, against her aching shoulders, felt like heaven as she sank deeper into the bubbling warmth. Her service weapons safely locked in the house, her badge tucked away in her wallet. The suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Heights had been her sanctuary. For 3 years now, quiet streets, manicured lawns, the kind of place where the biggest crime was usually a stolen Amazon package. Sarah had saved every penny of her detective's salary to afford the down payment on the modest 2-story house with its small backyard oasis. She'd just closed her eyes, feeling the tension melt from her muscles, when the thunderous crash shattered the peaceful night. The world exploded in a symphony of destruction. Metal grinding against stone, the sickening crack of fiberglass splitting apart, water erupting like a geyser as a silver Mercedes SUV came to a grinding halt halfway through what used to be her jacuzzi. Steam rose from the wreckage, mixing hot water with the SUV's overheated radiator. Sarah shot up from the water, her cop instincts kicking in immediately. She grabbed the terry cloth robe from the nearby chair, her bare feet slipping on the suddenly wet concrete as she rushed toward the destruction. Glass crunched under her feet, and she could feel the sharp sting of small cuts, but adrenaline pushed her forward. The SUV's driver's door swung open with a metallic groan, and out stepped a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair that somehow remained untouched by the chaos she'd just created. She wore a white tennis outfit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment, and her face was twisted into an expression of righteous indignation. "Well, I hope you've learned your lesson," the woman announced, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from her designer sleeve. Her voice carried the entitled tone of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, water still dripping from her hair, trying to process what she was seeing. "Excuse me, you just drove your car through my jacuzzi." The woman, Karen, Sarah would learn later, placed her hands on her hips and looked Sarah up and down with obvious disdain. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before disrespecting me and my family." "What are you talking about? I don't even know you." Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, you know exactly what you did. My son Tyler came home crying because some little Asian girl embarrassed him at the community pool today. Said she was showing off, acting like she was better than everyone else." Sarah's memory clicked into place. That afternoon, she'd stopped by the community pool for a quick swim before her shift. There had been a teenage boy, blonde, entitled, been making crude comments about her exotic appearance to his friends while she swam laps. When she'd gotten out of the pool, he'd made some remark about all Asians being good at swimming because they're desperate to escape their countries. She'd simply looked at him and said, "Actually, I'm good at swimming because I was on my high school team. I'm also good at catching criminals because I'm a detective. Maybe you should focus on being good at something that doesn't involve being a racist." The kid had turned red as his friends laughed, and he'd stormed off. Sarah hadn't thought about it again until now. "Your son was being racist," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her growing anger. "I simply corrected him." "Racist?" Karen screeched, her face flushing red. "Tyler is not racist. He's a good boy, and you humiliated him in front of his friends. Do you have any idea who we are? My husband is David Wellington, Wellington Industries. We practically built this neighborhood." Sarah knew the name. Wellington Industries was one of the largest construction companies in the state, with contracts worth millions. They'd built half the developments in the county, including several government buildings. "I don't care if your husband is the governor," Sarah said, stepping closer. The broken glass crunched under her bare feet, but she ignored the pain. "He just committed destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and probably a dozen other charges. Not to mention you could have killed someone." Karen's eyes narrowed, taking in Sarah's appearance, the modest robe, the small house, the now destroyed jacuzzi that had clearly been Sarah's one luxury. "Look at you, living in your little starter home, playing in your cheap plastic hot tub. People like you need to learn your place. You can't just mouth off to your betters and expect no consequences." "My betters." Sarah's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Yes, your betters. This is America, sweetheart. We have a hierarchy here, and people like you," Karen gestured dismissively at Sarah's face, "need to remember that." The racist implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt her hands clench into fists, every instinct telling her to respond with force. But she was off duty, in her robe, and this was clearly going to require official intervention. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Sarah said quietly. Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What are you going to do? Call the police?" "My husband's company has contracts with the city. We golf with the mayor. Hell, we probably pay more in taxes than you make in a year." You think anyone's going to believe some little immigrant over the Wellington family? I'm not an immigrant. I was born in San Francisco, whatever, same difference. The point is, you embarrassed my son, and now you know what happens when people like you forget their place. Consider this a lesson in respect. Karen turned to walk back to her SUV, apparently planning to simply drive away through the gaping hole she'd created in Sarah's fence. The entitlement was breathtaking. She'd just committed multiple felonies and was acting like she'd done nothing more than deliver a pizza. Where do you think you're going? Sarah called out. Home, Karen replied without turning around. And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut about this. Trust me, you don't want to make an enemy of my family. That's when Sarah smiled for the first time since the crash. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile she wore when a suspect thought they were smarter than she was, right before she proved them very, very wrong. She walked calmly to her house, glass still crunching under her feet, and retrieved her wallet from the kitchen counter. Karen was struggling to back her damaged SUV out of the Jacuzzi wreckage. The vehicle's bumper caught on a piece of twisted metal. Sarah returned to the backyard, pulling out her badge and holding it up so the streetlight caught the metal surface. Karen Wellington, she called out, her voice now carrying the full authority of her position. I'm Detective Sarah Chen, Metro Police Department. You're under arrest. Karen's head snapped around, her face going pale as she saw the badge glinting in the light. For the first time since climbing out of her SUV, she looked uncertain. You single quotes You're a cop, 15 years on the force. 7, as a detective? And congratulations, you just committed multiple felonies in front of a sworn officer while making racist statements that I'll be including in my report. The color drained completely from Karen's face. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait, Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the night air like a blade. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because every word out of your mouth from this point forward is going into evidence. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. As Sarah continued the Miranda warning, Karen's entitled smirk slowly melted into something resembling panic. The woman who'd been so confident about her family's influence and power was beginning to realize that badges trumped bank accounts, and justice had a way of finding everyone ever in the Wellington family. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel of her damaged SUV, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. The confident woman who'd stepped out moments earlier had been replaced by someone whose world was crumbling in real time. This is ridiculous, she stammered, her voice losing its earlier authority. You can't arrest me. I'm Karen Wellington. My husband will have your badge. Sarah pulled out her phone, keeping her eyes fixed on Karen. Dispatch. This is Detective Chen. Badge number 2847. I need backup in a tow truck at 1247 Maple Street. Suspect is in custody for multiple felonies, including destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and hate crime enhancement. Hate crime. Karen's voice cracked. I never said anything about race. Ma'am, you specifically mentioned people like me, referenced a hierarchy in America, called me an immigrant despite being told I'm American, and stated that I need to know my place, all while committing felonies motivated by retaliation for your son's racist behavior being corrected. Sarah's voice remained professionally calm, but there was steel underneath. Every word is going in the report. The sound of sirens began echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Porch lights were flickering on up and down the street as neighbors emerged to see what had caused the tremendous crash. Sarah could see Mrs. Patterson from next door recording everything on her phone from behind her fence. David will fix this, Karen said, pulling out her own phone with shaking hands. He knows everyone. The mayor, the police chief, half the city council, they all owe him favors. Sarah watched as Karen dialed, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders. The cold night air was making her shiver, but she wasn't about to give Karen any opportunity to flee or destroy evidence. David, I need you too. Karen's face went pale as she listened to whatever response she was getting. What do you mean you're in Seattle? I thought your conference wasn't until next week. Sarah couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Karen's increasingly frantic tone told the story. No, you need to come home right now. I've been arrested. Arrested, David. Some Asian cop is trying to. Karen's face went even whiter, and she pulled the phone away from her ear. Even from several feet away, Sarah could hear the angry male voice shouting through the speaker. He hung up on me, Karen whispered, staring at her phone in disbelief. The first patrol car arrived, its red and blue lights painting the destruction. In the backyard, in alternating colors, Officer Martinez stepped out, someone Sarah had worked with numerous times. His eyes widened as he took in the scene: the SUV buried in the destroyed jacuzzi, water everywhere, and Sarah standing in a bathrobe holding her badge. Detective Chen, are you injured? Minor cuts on my feet from the glass, but I'm fine. Suspect is Karen Wellington, and she's been read her rights. The SUV is evidence I wanted impounded and processed for any mechanical failures that might have contributed to this incident. Officer Martinez nodded, pulling out his notebook. A second patrol car arrived, followed by the tow truck Sarah had requested. The quiet suburban street was now a crime scene, complete with flashing lights and growing crowd of neighbors. This is insane, Karen said, climbing out of her SUV as Martinez approached. Officer, I need you to understand this woman provoked my son earlier today. She was disrespectful to him at the community pool. I was just trying to teach her some manners. Martinez looked at Sarah, who nodded grimly. By driving your vehicle through her property, it was just a hot tub, a cheap plastic thing. I'll pay for it, obviously. There's no need for all this drama. Sarah stepped forward. Officer Martinez, for the record, that cheap plastic thing was a $12,000 therapeutic spa that I saved for 2 years to buy. It was professionally installed with electrical and plumbing work. The damage to my property easily exceeds $20,000 when you include the destroyed fencing, landscaping, and structural damage to my patio. Karen's mouth fell open. $20,000? That's impossible. The spa alone was $12,000. Professional installation was another $3,000. The custom stone surround was $4,000. The electrical work was $2,000. And that's before we get to the fencing, the damaged patio stones, and the landscaping you destroyed driving through my yard. Sarah's voice remained level. Professional. You didn't research your target very well, Mrs. Wellington. A white sedan pulled up, and Sarah recognized Detective Rivera from her unit. He must have heard the call on the radio and decided to check on his partner. Rivera's eyes took in the scene with the practiced assessment of a veteran investigator. Sarah, what the hell happened here? Long story. The short version is Mrs. Wellington decided to commit vehicular assault against my property because I told her racist son to behave himself at the community pool this afternoon. Rivera walked over to examine the SUV, pulling out a small flashlight. No skid marks leading up to the fence. This wasn't an accident. She accelerated straight through. He looked up at Karen with disgust. Lady, you realize you could have killed someone? I knew she was in the hot tub, Karen protested. I wasn't trying to hurt her, just scare her. Sarah and Rivera exchanged glances. That statement was going to make the prosecutor's job very easy. So you're admitting this was intentional? Rivera asked, his tone deceptively casual. Karen realized her mistake too late. I was upset. People say things when they're upset. People say things. Rivera agreed. They don't usually drive SUVs through other people's property. A sleek black BMW pulled up, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Even at 11 o'clock at night, he looked like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom. This had to be David Wellington, back from Seattle faster than anyone could have expected. David Wellington strode across the lawn, his face a mask of controlled fury, but as he approached, Sarah noticed his anger wasn't directed at the police. It was focused entirely on his wife. David, thank God, Karen started. Tell them who we are. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. David stopped in front of the group, his eyes taking in the destroyed jacuzzi, the SUV, and his wife standing in handcuffs that Martinez had just applied. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Karen, please tell me you didn't do what I think you did. She was disrespectful to Tyler. She embarrassed him in front of his friends. Someone needed to teach her stop talking. David's command was sharp enough to cut glass. He turned to Sarah with an expression of profound mortification. Ma'am, I am so sorry. My wife? She's been having some issues lately. Issues? Karen shrieked. What issues? I was defending our son. David's face flushed red. Our son was being a racist little brat, and when someone called him on it, you decided to commit felony destruction of property. Do you have any idea what you've done? Sarah watched the family drama unfold with professional interest. Domestic disputes often revealed more about the real dynamics than any investigation could. The company has contracts with the city worth $40 million, David continued, his voice rising. We're bidding on the new courthouse project another $60 million. And you just committed hate crimes against a police detective. The color drained from Karen's face as the full implications began to sink in. Hate crimes. David, I didn't. You targeted her because of her race in retaliation for her standing up to Tyler's racism, while committing multiple felonies. David turned back to Sarah. Detective, I'll cover all damages immediately. Full restitution, plus whatever additional compensation you think is appropriate. Sarah shook her head. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate the offer. But this isn't about money anymore. Your wife committed serious crimes, and she did it with racist motivations. That's not something that can be fixed with a check. David closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked like a man watching his empire crumble. I understand completely. Karen will face the full consequences of her actions. David, Karen stared at her husband in shock. You're supposed to be on my side. I was on your side when you needed therapy for your anger issues. I was on your side when you screamed at the landscaper for being Mexican. I was on your side when you called the police on that black family at the park because their kids were too loud. But this, he gestured at the destruction. This is where I draw the line. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Your wife has a history of racist behavior. David's silence was answer enough. Rivera stepped forward, his detective instincts kicking in. Mr. Wellington, we're going to need a detailed statement about your wife's previous incidents. This pattern of behavior is going to be very relevant to the prosecution. Karen looked around wildly as she realized everyone even her own husband was aligned against her. This isn't fair. I'm not a racist. I just wanted to protect my son by committing hate crimes, Sarah said quietly. Mrs. Wellington, you're going to be charged with felony destruction of property, reckless endangerment, vehicular assault, intimidation, and hate crime enhancement. Depending on the DA's office, you could be looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. For the first time since climbing out of her SUV, Karen Wellington looked truly afraid. The Maplewood Heights police station at 2 a.m. was a fluorescent-lit purgatory where Karen Wellington sat in an interrogation room, her tennis whites stained with jacuzzi water and her perfect hair finally showing signs of the chaos she'd created. The designer outfit that had once symbolized her status now looked ridiculous under the harsh institutional lighting. Detective Sarah Chen had gone home to change. Returning in her standard-issue slacks and blazer, her badge prominently displayed, the transformation was striking. Gone was the vulnerable woman in a bathrobe, replaced by a seasoned investigator who'd put away murderers and gang leaders. Across the table sat Karen's hastily summoned attorney, Marcus Fitzpatrick, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his obvious discomfort with his client's situation. He'd been David Wellington's corporate lawyer for years, but criminal defense was far outside his expertise. Mrs. Wellington, Sarah began, her voice professionally neutral as she started the recording equipment. You've been advised of your rights. Are you willing to give a statement? Fitzpatrick leaned forward. My client maintains her innocence, Sarah interrupted, sliding a tablet across the table, showing security footage from a neighbor's Ring doorbell. This is from 1247 Maple Street, recorded at 9:47 p.m. tonight. The video was damning. It showed Karen's SUV deliberately accelerating through Sarah's fence, swerving to avoid the house, but aimed directly at the jacuzzi where Sarah was visible in the background. There was no mistaking the intentional nature of the act. Karen's face went ashen as she watched herself commit multiple felonies in high definition. The angle is perfect, Sarah continued. We can see you looking directly at me in the jacuzzi before you accelerated. This wasn't road rage or an accident. This was a calculated attack. Fitzpatrick cleared his throat nervously. Detective, perhaps we could discuss a plea arrangement, Marcus. Shut up, Karen snapped, some of her earlier arrogance returning. I don't need a plea deal. This whole thing is blown out of proportion. Sarah leaned back in her chair, recognizing the type. Karen was the kind of person who'd never faced real consequences for her actions, who still believed her privilege would protect her even now. Mrs. Wellington, let's talk about your son Tyler's incident at the community pool yesterday. There was no incident. Tyler was just being a normal teenager, and this woman overreacted. Sarah pulled out another device, her phone, with the voice recording app open. Actually, I recorded part of our conversation in my backyard tonight. Would you like to hear what you said about people like me in America's hierarchy? Karen, defiance cracked slightly. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. Maryland is a one-party consent state, Mrs. Wellington. I can legally record any conversation I'm part of. Sarah pressed play. Karen's voice filled the small room. This is America, sweetheart. We have a hierarchy here, and people like you need to remember that. Fitzpatrick winced visibly. Hate crime enhancements were notoriously difficult to defend against when the defendant had literally stated their discriminatory motivations on tape. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I've been in contact with the community pool. They have security cameras that recorded your son's behavior yesterday, including his comments about Asians being desperate to escape their countries. Karen's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. And that's not all. Sarah pulled out a thick folder. After your husband mentioned your history, I made some calls. Turns out, you've been quite busy. She opened the folder and began reading. March 15, 2023, called police on the Martinez family for suspicious activity. They were having a birthday party in their own backyard. April 2, 2023, confronted the lawn service crew, demanding to see papers from workers who were legal immigrants. June 18, 2023, filed a complaint with HOA about the Kim family's foreign cooking smells. Each entry made Karen smaller in her chair. Fitzpatrick was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how impossible this case was going to be to defend. September 3, 2023, demanded a black family leave the community pool because their children were too loud and aggressive. December 12, 2023, called ICE on the Ramirez family after they complained about your dog barking. Those were legitimate concerns. Karen protested weakly. Were they? Sarah pulled out more documents. Because I also have statements from 17 different neighbors describing a pattern of racially motivated harassment spanning 3 years. The HOA has documentation of 47 complaints you've filed, 39 of which specifically targeted families of color. The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Fitzpatrick looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. This isn't just about a destroyed jacuzzi anymore, Mrs. Wellington. This is about a documented pattern of hate-motivated behavior, culminating in you committing multiple felonies while explicitly stating your racist motivations. Karen's facade finally crumbled completely. I'm not a racist. I worked hard for what I have. We built this community to be safe, to be orderly. Orderly, Sarah repeated, meaning white. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean when you told me people like me need to learn their place in America's hierarchy? Karen had no answer. There was a knock on the interrogation room door. Detective Rivera poked his head in. Sarah, you need to see this. Sarah stepped outside, leaving Karen with her increasingly uncomfortable lawyer. Rivera handed her a tablet showing social media posts. Tyler Wellington's Instagram account, Rivera explained. Kid's been posting some real charming content. Sarah scrolled through posts filled with racial slurs, memes about immigrants taking over, and videos of Tyler making mock Asian accents. The most recent post, from just hours ago, showed Tyler laughing about how his mom was teaching some chink a lesson. Jesus, Sarah breathed. It gets worse. Look at the comments. The comment section was filled with Tyler's friends praising the attack, sharing their own racist stories, and encouraging more violence. Several had already been screenshot and were spreading across social media platforms. The story's gone, viral, Rivera continued. Local news picked it up. National outlets are starting to call. The video from the neighbor's Ring doorbell is all over Twitter. Sarah looked through the interrogation room window at Karen, who was slumped in her chair while Fitzpatrick spoke in urgent whispers. She has no idea, does she? None. But her husband does. David Wellington's been calling every hour, trying to get ahead of this. Apparently Wellington Industries stock has already dropped 12% in after-hours trading. 3 major contracts are under review, and the mayor's office is reassessing their relationship with the company. Sarah felt a cold satisfaction. Good. When she returned to the interrogation room, Karen looked up hopefully. Are we done here? Because I'd really like to go home. Sarah sat down and looked Karen directly in the eye. Mrs. Wellington, I need to inform you that your son's social media posts about tonight's incident have gone viral. The terms he used to describe me, and the celebration of your attack, are now being seen by millions of people. Karen's face went white. What posts? Sarah showed her the tablet. Karen's hands shook as she read Tyler's gleeful account of his mother putting the Oriental bitch in her place. Oh God, Karen whispered. Tyler, what have you done? What you taught him to do, Sarah replied without sympathy. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Fitzpatrick cleared his throat. Detective, my client would like to discuss a plea arrangement. No plea deals, Sarah said firmly. Mrs. Wellington committed multiple felonies with clear hate crime enhancements. She's going to face the full consequences of her actions. Karen began to cry, not the manipulative tears of someone trying to gain sympathy, but the desperate sobs of someone finally understanding that their world was ending. My family, she choked out. My husband's business. Tyler's college applications. You're destroying everything. Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady and implacable. Mrs. Wellington, I didn't destroy anything. You did. The moment you decided that your racism was more important than basic human decency, you set all of this in motion. Outside the interrogation room, the first news vans were pulling into the police station parking lot. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood on the steps of the Montgomery County Courthouse, microphones thrust toward her face as reporters shouted questions. The media circus that had begun the night Karen Wellington drove through her Jacuzzi had only intensified as the case progressed through the legal system. Detective Chen, how do you feel about today's verdict? Sarah adjusted her uniform, the same badge that had started this whole chain of events gleaming in the afternoon sun. Behind her, the courthouse doors opened and Karen Wellington emerged in handcuffs. Flanked by the woman who had once embodied entitled privilege now looked broken and hollow, her designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Justice was served today, Sarah said simply. The jury saw through Mrs. Wellington's attempts to portray herself as a victim and recognized her actions for what they were: calculated hate crimes driven by racial animus. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: felony destruction of property, vehicular assault, intimidation, and hate crime enhancement. The pattern of racist behavior Sarah had uncovered had been devastating to the defense, painting a picture of escalating hatred that culminated in the attack on Sarah's property. The sentence of 8 years in state prison sends a clear message, Sarah continued. Racism has consequences. Hate has consequences, and privilege doesn't protect you from justice. In the crowd, Sarah spotted David Wellington. The man who had once run a multi-million-dollar construction empire now looked like a ghost of his former self. Wellington Industries had collapsed. Within 3 months of the incident, their government contracts canceled and their reputation destroyed. The family's Maplewood Heights mansion was in foreclosure, and David was facing his own legal troubles as federal investigators examined whether the company had discriminated in hiring practices. Tyler Wellington had been expelled from his elite prep school and rejected from every college he'd applied to after his social media posts went viral. The 18-year-old was now working at a gas station and living in a studio apartment, his bright future as destroyed as his mother's freedom. Detective Chen, another reporter called out, What would you say to people who think 8 years is too harsh? Sarah's expression hardened. Mrs. Wellington didn't commit a crime of passion. She spent hours planning this attack. She drove to my home with the intent to terrorize me based on my race. She destroyed property worth over $20,000. And when confronted, she doubled down on her racist beliefs. She paused, looking directly into the camera. 8 years isn't harsh enough. As the reporters dispersed and Karen was loaded into a transport van, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Detective Rivera, who had been instrumental in building the case against Karen. "How's the new jacuzzi?" he asked with a grin. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had all day. "Better than the old one. The insurance settlement and the civil judgment from the Wellingtons bought me the deluxe model." They had indeed pursued Karen civilly as well, winning a judgment that would ensure Sarah was compensated not just for the property damage, but for emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages. The Wellington family's financial ruin was complete. "What's next for you?" Rivera asked as they walked down the courthouse steps. "Back to work," Sarah replied, "though I have to admit, this case opened my eyes to how much racist harassment goes unreported in our community. I'm working with community groups to create better reporting mechanisms." The Karen Wellington case had become a catalyst for broader change. The Maplewood Heights HOA had been dissolved after an investigation revealed systematic discrimination in their complaint processes. Several neighbors who had remained silent about Karen's behavior for years had come forward with their own stories, leading to a community-wide reckoning about enabling racism through inaction. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had recorded the initial incident. The message included a photo of Sarah's backyard, now fully restored with an even more beautiful landscaping design than before. "It looks perfect for a celebration," the message read. As Sarah drove home, she reflected on this strange journey that had begun with her wanting nothing more than a peaceful soak in her jacuzzi after a difficult case. Karen Wellington had intended to teach her a lesson about knowing her place in America's supposed hierarchy. Instead, Karen had learned a far more valuable lesson: that justice doesn't recognize hierarchies, that badges carry more weight than bank accounts, and that in America, everyone regardless of wealth or status is equal under the law. Sarah pulled into her driveway and walked through her back gate. The new jacuzzi was indeed beautiful, surrounded by restored landscaping that was more spectacular than what had been destroyed. But what struck her most was the small plaque that had been installed near the spa, a gift from the community members who had rallied around her during the trial. The plaque read, "In a just society, courage is rewarded and hatred is punished. Stand up, speak out. The law protects those who protect others." As Sarah settled into the warm water of her new jacuzzi, she thought about Karen Wellington, spending her first night in a state prison cell. The woman who had driven into this very spot to teach her a lesson had ultimately taught the entire community something far more important: that racism, no matter how privileged or powerful its perpetrator, would always meet its match in the uncompromising pursuit of justice. The water was perfect. The neighborhood was quiet. And Detective Sarah Chen finally had the peace she'd been looking for 6 months ago, knowing that justice, real, meaningful justice, had been served. Karen Wellington had indeed taught everyone a lesson, just not the one she'd intended.